Chris Gaubatz has been doing a lot of work, as I said, some of it undercover, some of it subsequent to that experience, teaching law enforcement agents and many others in and out of government about what the Muslim Brotherhood has called the civilization jihad, which is part and parcel of what CAIR, among many other outfits, also unindicted co-conspirators in the Holy Land Foundation trial have done. But Chris, thank you so much for joining us and for what you're doing for cause and country, and the floor is yours.
All right.
Tell us a little bit
Can I
about
stand
it.
up?
You can do as you wish.
All right.
She can't, but you can.
Yeah, thank you, Frank, for having me. Always an honor.
Apparently you need to stay on.
Oh, okay. I walk around too much. Thank you all for coming out. Colonel White, it's good to see you again, Roy. Look, this is a topic that, as I travel around the country, whether it's briefing legislators or working with law enforcement, or my favorite, working with citizens, just talking about this threat, I have to say that I don't typically bring a lot of good news, so sorry about that. But we'll have a good discussion. And one of the things that I like to break down from the very beginning when I start talking about this threat is why I understand it. And the reason that I understand the Islamic movement, the jihadi movement, the global Islamic movement as they refer to themselves, is because I started out spending 6 months straight undercover with them. And going to their mosques, listening to Islamic scholars, learning about Islam from Islamic scholars, from imams, from books written by Islamic scholars for Muslims. In fact, the first few years that I actually started studying this threat, I really didn't purposely read anything other than books by Islamic scholars. And it was interesting because Jackie brought up al-Awlaki, which was, I was so quick to answer that because the mosque that I did my fake undercover shahada, or conversion to Islam as part of the project, he was the imam prior to me getting there. Now, for those of you that aren't aware, I'm sure most of you at least heard the name al-Awlaki, right? Most of us have heard of him. This was a guy that at one time national media referred to as the new voice of moderate Islam. And then all of a sudden one day he pops up in Al-Qaeda, or in Yemen as an Al-Qaeda leader. That was the environment that I went into. Now what was interesting about this experience was working undercover with a group like the Muslim Brotherhood. We have to understand, if we're going to understand civilization jihad, if we're going to understand the Muslim Brotherhood, if we're going to understand jihadi groups, whether it's Al-Qaeda, the Islamic State, the Muslim Brotherhood, the Taliban, Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, all these different jihadi organizations, we have to understand what jihad is. Now it fascinates me, it's scary, but it's fascinating that we are still in the United States government to this day debating the term jihad. Now, I'm not saying President Trump is. I'm pretty sure he made it clear on the campaign trail and afterwards that at his gut level, President Trump understands this threat. But the people around him certainly do not, particularly at the State Department, and I'm hoping that that will be changing soon. But we're still debating the term jihad, and yet Islamic scholars around the world are not and have not been for 1,400 years. So jihad legally defined, because this is a legal system, legally jihad is defined as warfare against non-Muslims. Period, point blank. Anything else you see about the inner struggle and the warm and fuzzy inner struggle, like when you wake up in the morning, you'll see CAIR put out videos about waking up in the morning and your car doesn't start, and that's their jihad. Or college students, finals week, right? That's a tough one right there because they've got to study so hard and stay up so late. That's their jihad, right? That's their struggle. The problem is the enemy's threat doctrine, regardless of which jihadi group we're talking about, is Sharia. And Sharia legally defines as jihad as warfare against non-Muslims. Now this is where I'm going to deviate a little bit from the discussion that's typically had when we discuss jihad. Because we're typically talking about kinetic acts of warfare, right? We're typically talking about San Bernardino or Orlando or Fort Hood or 9/11 or attacks overseas in Europe or in the Middle East and around the world. explosions, people shooting things, people stabbing people. These are all horrible. The enemy will never win this war through kinetic warfare, and they know that. The information battle space is where they will win this war. The information battle space, the education. When our children go to school and they're taught that Islam means peace in as little as elementary school, when you have legislators, as Jackie mentioned, touched on, having interns come in from the Muslim Brotherhood to affect domestic and foreign counterterrorism policy in a congressional office, that is how the enemy sees themselves winning this war. By working with media and media contacts, whether it's mainstream national media or local media, or social media like Google and Facebook and Twitter. This is how the enemy sees them winning the war. In fact, Ayman al-Zawahiri, at the time he was number 2 of al-Qaeda, said that we are in an information war. This is a war in the media. Even al-Qaeda understands that this is not going to be won by shooting things and blowing things up. Now, CAIR is in a unique position just blocks from the US Capitol because they are what we can aptly call suit-wearing jihadis. They're not the guys with the long beards. They're not the guys screaming into a microphone about destroying Israel. They're very polished. They will say the same things as the jihadis, but they'll wear suits. And typically, if you're around a Muslim brother, typically they have the biggest personality in the room. They smile real big. They're funny. They're charming. Because for them, influence operations are where they're going to win this. Information, affecting people. There's a reason when we talk about Sharia, it was interesting to me, the panel earlier was discussing Sharia implementation in Europe. And we are thinking of Sharia as far as blasphemy laws and apostasy laws and halal and legal matters, whether it's civil or divorce, marriage matters. But one of the main ways that civilization jihad, which is destroying Western civilization from within, the main ways that they're going to win this is that we impose Sharia on ourselves. And for those of you that are thinking, no way, especially here in Texas, I know that Texas attitude will never do that, but I want you to ask yourself a question. Have you or anyone you known ever thought about saying something about Islam, jihad, or Sharia and cut yourself short because it would affect your personal relationships, or it could affect career or business or anything? Because this is happening all over the country. It's happening with law enforcement, where they should be getting training specifically about the enemy's threat doctrine, Sharia, and they're not, because these suit-wearing jihadis that are working with them are showing up to their offices telling them that if they get training that identifies the enemy, whether it's the Islamic State or al-Qaeda, as a jihadi, then they're going to get blasted, in not so many words I'll say this, they're going to get blasted on national media as an Islamophobic, racist police department. And who wants that, right? So whether it's a chief of police, whether it's a mayor, whether it's a legislator, whether it's a business owner, we are self-imposing Islamic law, Sharia, on ourselves. And I know for time's sake, I wanted to go into a lot more, but there's a couple of things that I want to talk about as far as jihad being total warfare. Total warfare. So whether it's media manipulation, whether it's propaganda, whether it's legislative influence operations, subversive groups, they're going to come at us from every single angle. Now, whether it is a jihadi organization in San Diego that has an anti-bullying program. Has anybody heard about this? San Diego School District brought in CAIR, a Hamas organization, and they were going to implement a district-wide anti-bullying campaign that wasn't anti-bullying in general. It was teaching students, teachers, and parents about how to properly treat Muslims so that they don't feel offended in the school district, to the exclusion of every other group. That's happening in the country right now. That's a part of civilization jihad. It's the same thing that the Marxists did decades ago, and I don't have time to go into that today, but let's just say the jihadis would not have made nearly the gains that they've made if it weren't for the Marxist infiltration into our society. But again, that's a cheerful topic for another day. But whether it is FGM, right? I mean, we've got Europe, I see it on social media all the time, about women and girls not being protected in Europe. And yet that's going on right here in America too. So I really appreciated that, what Raheem said earlier about the fact that if we think that this is a European problem, we are so far wrong it's not even funny. And it's dangerous to not acknowledge that. What are some of the other examples we have? We have a California textbook that just came, or not a textbook, a yearbook that just came out with a full 2-page spread titled Allahu Akbar. Now, Allahu Akbar is the call that a jihadi makes before they kill or before they wage jihad. Because remember, we're not just talking about kinetic warfare. Jihad is total warfare. So, to the exclusion of Christianity, Judaism, or any other faith group, there is a yearbook spread called Allahu Akbar in a school in California. This is happening all over the country. I get these stories, I'm sure Frank does, and of course Colonel White does with his organization, all over the country, of where these types of infiltrations are occurring and taking place, where you've got something going on in a school or a district or a library or a police department that is allowing these suit-wearing jihadis to come in and train them. And I'll just finish on this note. If we don't take this threat more seriously at the local level, we will continue to lose this war. And we cannot rely on President Trump, as he's made a lot of gains. He's done some great things as far as this particular threat goes, but we can't rely on President Trump at the local level. This has to be done. This is going to be won or lost, county by county, state by state. So looking forward to the Q&A, and thank you.